Islam Makhachev's next fight should definitely be against Ilia Topuria. And yes, I understand the arguments that Ilia shouldn't be allowed to skip the queue, and that Islam Makhachev would just be defending his belt again against a featherweight. But hopefully by the end of this video, I've convinced you all that this is the fight, for the sake of the sport, that needs to happen next. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at this potential super fight. Both these guys have now reacted to rumours of the fight. They've given their opinions, so we'll react to a few clips and a few tweets from that. And of course, there'll be a fight breakdown. And if you are a fan of Ilia Topuria, I've noticed one thing that we're going to get to in this video that should give you a lot of hope. Yes, guys, welcome back to Fight Energy. With UFC 313 taking place next week, I thought now would be a good opportunity to get this video in. Next week, we're going to be covering Alex Pereira against Magomed Ankalaev, Dan Hooker, Justin Gaethje. We're going to go super deep on both of those fights. So I thought now would be a better time than ever, especially because there's been so much talk about Islam Makhachev against Ilia Topuria. What would this fight actually look like? And should it be next? Now, before we get on to the interviews and the fight clips, I do want to give one of my main reasons why I think this fight should be next. And I'm not discarding the fact that Ilia only has 2 featherweight defences, and Islam Makhachev, he's almost making a habit through no fault of his own of fighting people who don't deserve title shots, or of featherweights moving up to lightweight. But even so, this is the fight that needs to happen next. You know that feeling you get when a main event you're really excited about, palms get a bit clammy, maybe not for you, but definitely for me, and you're super hyped up for the fight? Tell me a fight, other than maybe John Jones, Tom Aspinall, or Pereira, John Jones, Tom Aspinall, something in that mix that gets you as excited as this fight. Let's just take meritocracy and who deserves it. Just forget that for one moment. The fight that you'd be so excited to see the outcome of, and I'm not pretending that Ilia Topuria wouldn't be facing a massive uphill battle. I think he would be a big underdog heading into this one. You've got to think about Makhachev's physicality and all of that. But seeing the cage door lock and these two standing opposite from each other, I would be so excited to see this fight. It needs to happen next. Last week, Ariel Helwani was on his show talking about a superstar shortage in the UFC. Bit of a tongue twister that. A superstar shortage in the UFC. And whilst I do think there are superstars, you need to make the super fights. If you're going to get that crossover appeal, that mainstream appeal, champ status is probably the best thing to do that. Look at Daniel Cormier's career, and even to a greater extent Conor McGregor when he got that champ status. These guys do elevate their profiles, and I just feel as though it's been too long. That fight needs to happen next. And with that being said, let's take a look at what both fighters have had to say about this fight. Okay, so this tweet has a quote from Islam Makhachev where apparently he's talking about the Ilia Topuria fight. He says, "I'm not going to give him a chance right away. He didn't do all the work he had to do in his weight class. There are contenders who he must defeat. Let him earn a chance and we will fight." This is interesting, and I did make this point at the start of the video. I know that a lot of people will be saying Ilia just simply hasn't earned it. But I think with that in mind, you kind of have to think about who he's beaten in his featherweight run and who else there is to beat. He's beaten 2 of the best, 2 of the reigning champions from featherweight over the past decade. Not only beaten them, but knocked them out in Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski. These just aren't 2 regular title wins and then 1 title defense. These are huge fights that massively elevated his profile as a fighter. So for Islam Makhachev to say that he doesn't deserve it, you do have to consider the quality of opposition he's faced. And then when you look down the rankings at the potential contenders in the featherweight division, Movsar Evloev, Diego Lopez, yes, these fighters are really good, putting together really nice win streaks, surging up the division. But do you honestly want to see these fights more than Islam Makhachev against Ilia Topuria? I'm sure some hardcores out there would tell you that Evloev and Topuria would be a grappling masterclass, and Diego Lopez with his wild style could cause Ilia Topuria some problems. I've no doubt that both of those things could be true, but purely from a fan's perspective and someone who truly cares about the UFC putting on the biggest fights possible, none of these contender fights against Ilia Topuria even come close to the thought of Islam Makhachev against Ilia Topuria. So yes, I completely understand Makhachev's reasoning here. He put together a huge win streak on his way up to the lightweight title, but the scene's different. Divisions change, things move on, and I do think for Makhachev to say that Topuria has more work to do does discredit his wins against 2 all-time greats. So that's what Islam Makhachev had to say about this potential fight. Let's hear what Ilia Topuria said. Last week he was on the Nelk Boys, the Full Send podcast, where he spoke with Kyle, About this potential fight happening, he actually says that it's in the works. Let's have a look.
I really believe that I can beat the current champion, Islam. I like to fight with people that the fans think that it's going to be very competitive. So with Islam, I'm going to have that.
The Islam fight would be a fucking super fight.
That's a great fight. That's a great.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I do want to unpack from that clip. Now, I know that Ilia Topuria, he does rub people up the wrong way, especially with some things that he says. People accuse him of being really arrogant. We're actually going to get to one of the things he says about Islam Makhachev later on in another clip. But you can't hate that attitude. He wants to put on exciting fights that people want to see, that people believe will be competitive, not one-sided. Firstly, that does tell you a lot about his own self-belief and what he's done running through the featherweight division. But also, he's prepared to risk it, to risk greatness. You can't hate on that attitude. The other thing that I wanted to mention was how Kyle says that would be a huge fight. Now, Kyle from Nelt Boys, I know that the Nelt Boys, they all go to the UFC events, don't they? They're friends with Dana. But I don't think you'd put them in the category of hardcore. They're definitely more towards the casual fans. And for casual fans to say that Islam Makhachev against Ilia Topuria would be a huge fight, that kind of tells you everything you need to know about the scale of this fight. And Ilia Topuria against Evloev or Diego Lopez definitely would be nowhere near as popular as this one. Let's watch the rest.
Right. That's why I want to do it.
Why do you think the UFC doesn't want to make it happen?
I don't think that they don't want to make it happen.
It's in the works.
Yeah, it's in the works. They are trying to figure out some things. He's gonna have some.
Okay, so that nod to the camera, that little wink, whatever it was, tells you that Ilia knows something we don't. The UFC wants this fight. But circling back to the start of the video, why wouldn't they want this fight? It'll be the highest grossing fight of the year. If you're thinking that John Jones, Tom Aspinall won't happen. Again, it's a super fight, champ status. It's everything the UFC wants to be doing. They don't necessarily want to be putting on Ilia Topuria against Diego Lopez. That might do well for the gate. It'll probably sell out in Mexico or Spain, wherever they want to put that. But in terms of the broader appeal, nothing compares to this fight.
Hard time with me, and something he knows and we all know is that the only thing I need, it's one punch. At some point, I will connect that punch, and everything will depend on what God will decide. If he wants to send Islam to sleep or not, who knows that?
This clip ends with Ilia Topuria saying all it will take is one punch. And remember that, because we're about to take a look at a fight clip which might actually help his case. But look, Ilia Topuria, he's a massive puncher. The unbreakable chin of Max Holloway, Topuria was able to break it. He knocked out Alexander Volkanovski cold in brutal fashion. The guy has absolutely bombs in his hands. However, these were all fights against people in his weight class. Islam Makhachev, he's a naturally bigger guy. Yes, he got knocked out years ago in his initial UFC run. Since then, he's looked like a completely different fighter, massively improved on the feet. It's not as simple as just landing one punch. However, we're going to take a look at Islam Makhachev's fight against Alexander Volkanovski, the first fight. And in the first couple of rounds, the speed of Alexander Volkanovski was causing Makhachev some issues. I'm going to do a quick caveat in saying that Islam Makhachev may have been struggling with the rehydration clause over in Australia. It was a much shorter window to rehydrate. People have said that already, so I don't want to put this clip out there without giving that caveat. At the same time, Alexander Volkanovski, the smaller, faster guy, and there were a couple of moments in the first and second round that we're about to take a look at where Volkanovski's speed was causing Makhachev some issues. And I expect if this fight does take place, I do think that Topuria would be the faster fighter. He's very good at that in and out movement, and I'm sure that he would land on Makhachev. Whether or not that's enough to put him out is up to you. I'll let you guys decide in the comments. But let's take a look at a clip from that first fight, which would give Topuria fans a lot of hope. Okay, so the pen is at the ready, and just before we break down this clip, I do want to say a quick thank you to everybody who watched the breakdown of Dricus du Plessis against Sean Strickland. Some really nice feedback from that. If you've not seen that video yet, do watch it after this one, let me know what you think. And if you've not subscribed to the channel yet, please do subscribe, it makes a big difference. So let's move this forward a few frames. As you can see, Alexander Volkanovski, he dips his head slightly off centre. Again, just imagine Ilia Topuria doing this, it's very similar to his style. Volkanovski lands a nice left hand just to the side of Makhachev's cheek, basically. Does force him backwards. Makhachev misses with a right hook. Volkanovski thinks about following up, but then he stops himself. allowing Makhachev to recenter. It's going to bring it forward a few more frames. Volkanovski, if you remember the start of this fight, he was so confident at the start, and so confident throughout the fight. It was a really good fight. I did score it for Makhachev. I think I gave it to him 4-1, but that often doesn't tell the story. 4-1 can still be a close fight. The rounds were still close. So Volkanovski moves in again, dipping his head, goes for a right hook this time, which ends up round the back of Makhachev. However, that left hand, short left hand, which Ilia Topuria is really good at mixing up, whether it's a long left hook or a short left hook. These kind of strikes. Look, Volkanovski's never, again, it hits kind of the chest of Islam Makhachev, forces him back, probably looks slightly worse than it actually was. But just looking at that sequence as a whole, Volkanovski was able to land multiple times on Islam Makhachev with his left hand. That's so important to note, especially with a southpaw fighter like Islam Makhachev. If he's not being disciplined with that lead hand, Topuria will be able to land on him. I'd like to think that Topuria is a faster striker than Volkanovski and a more powerful one. So if Makhachev was to allow Topuria to land these left hands on him, it could be a very different story. At the same time, you do need to appreciate that going into this fight, maybe Makhachev didn't respect the power of Volkanovski, so was a little bit less disciplined when it came to his defence. I'm sure he wouldn't take that same approach against a power puncher like Ilia Topuria. So I guess it comes down to whether or not you believe Ilia Topuria. Could it all come down to one punch? Now, taking a look at these guys' fights and seeing potential weaknesses that the other one could exploit, it's so difficult because they are both such elite pound-for-pound fighters. So seeing that clip of Makhachev kind of getting tagged a couple of times with the left hand, look, it's not quite scraping the barrel, but it's close. But even so, seeing these things, it does tell you a few things about how this potential super fight could look. On the other hand, Ilia Topuria, I'm really having to dig deep and find a time where he did get caught with a weapon that Islam Makhachev would use. And I reckon a few of you probably know what clip I'm about to show. If not, let's take a look now. Okay, so like I said, finding clips hasn't been easy, but I'm going back a few years now to, I believe it was UFC London, Jai Herbert against Ilia Topuria. So Ilia Topuria actually fought at lightweight for this fight. And as you can see here, Jai Herbert, he throws a right hand that kind of skims off the top of Ilia Topuria's head. Topuria does a nice job of getting his head off the centre line and lands a cracking right hand to Jai Herbert. All credit to Jai Herbert. He hasn't been on the best of runs recently, a fellow Brit, so I'm always going to look out for his fights. But he instinctively throws up that left high kick. Look at that beautiful shin on chin that lands as clean as it possibly could land on Ilia Topuria and completely folds him. Now look, Ilia Topuria, he's come on leaps and bounds from this fight. Bear in mind he did actually stop Jai Herbert in the next round, but this was a really interesting look. And if you are Islam Makhachev and we're about to look at a sequence where he finished Volkanovski in the second fight, if you do like a left high kick, and you know that Topuria may have a tendency of getting a bit sloppy with his right hand after he throws it, if he's not really quick at getting it back to his chin, then a left high kick could definitely be on. Let's just take a look at that clip from Volkanovski's second fight against Makhachev, see how these high kicks compare. Okay, so this is the finishing sequence, and if we're looking at any kind of similarities, again, this is going to be a bit of a stretch, but I'm just kind of looking for weaknesses here. Volkanovski's back is against the fence, similar to where Ilia Topuria was against Jai Herbert. And you can see Makhachev, he throws everything into this kick. Volkanovski has his guard up. He's got his right hand by his ear. But still, it clips the top of his head. You can see there, the angle that Volkanovski's head moves off to. I mean, it's a very, very clean head kick. And from that, Volkanovski was finished. Topuria swarms him and gets some follow-up shots on him to close out the show. But again, look, like I said, it's a stretch. Ilia Topuria got caught with a left head kick by Jai Herbert. Islam Makhachev has been known for throwing left high kicks. This isn't the only one that he's thrown. He throws them all the time. So could there be a potential opening there? I think another thing to consider is the fact that both Volkanovski and Ilia Topuria are featherweights moving up. And you can see the way that Makhachev, even though Volkanovski had his guard up, Makhachev didn't set up that kick. He just threw it. It was a really strong kick. Could the weight difference have made a real difference there? It's a possibility. The old cliche goes, there are weight classes for a reason. And as you could see here, Volkanovski, the power differential here, it was very evident. And when it comes to kicks, Islam Makhachev, he's got a very good sneaky left kick, as you saw there. So I just wanted to look at those couple of clips and let me know if I'm any closer to convincing you that this fight should be next. I just think it's got all the makings of an absolute classic. Topuria, he really plays the villain. I feel as though Makhachev, his relationship with DC, his broken English, he has won over a lot of fans recently. He's taking more of the babyface turn. This has the makings of an absolute classic. I think Topuria would be very, very good value in the press conferences. You know what he was like with Max Holloway in the build-up. They did some good interviews. I really hope they'd have something like that again. Let's take a look at one comment Topuria made recently that did rub up fans the wrong way. I'll have to add subtitles, I think, because it was translated. Let's take a look.
Claro que tiene miedo, por supuesto.
He's afraid, of course he's afraid.
Siempre es una pelea fácil hasta que te ponen el nombre en el contrato, ¿no? Así que todos lo sabemos. Si fuera tan fácil y si fuera tan enano como él dice, ya compartiría el octógono conmigo, ¿no? Por algo no quiere. Yo lo entiendo, así que está bien. Vete, súbete hacia arriba.
Okay, so it's up to you how deeply you want to read into that clip. Ilia Topuria saying, of course he's scared. If he wasn't scared, he'd have signed the contract. If he truly believes I'm really small, he'd have signed the contract. To me, this does sound just like a bit of public negotiation. Topuria trying to bait Makhachev into taking the fight. But if you're a martial arts purist or a big fan of Islam Makhachev, you might see this as disrespectful. It might fuel your hatred for Ilia Topuria even more, which all adds to the fire. It adds to this being a huge fight, and one that absolutely everyone should want to see. I feel like I should end this video by giving an early prediction. Things could change because it's very, very early. But I do think I'd give the edge to Islam Makhachev. It's an obvious pick. He's going to be the favourite. But I just think his size, physicality, I just think it'll prove too much for Ilia Topuria. Ilia Topuria is one of my favourite fighters in the UFC currently. I think he can do everything so well. The fact that he's knocking out these all-time greats, he's creating a legacy before our very eyes. So whether or not you like the comments or not, sorry if you can hear my dog going crazy, whether or not you like his comments or not, apologies for that. My early prediction rudely interrupted by my dog, who's obviously a massive Ilia Topuria fan. But as I was saying, I do think that Makhachev's strength, his size, will prove too much in this fight. Weight classes do matter for a reason, and I just think you've got to go with a favourite for this one. I do rate Topuria for going up in weight and really challenging himself. I think he could even give us a moment where he drops or hurts Makhachev with a big left hand. But I do think that Makhachev will just keep going. He's very tough. The toughness of Makhachev is underrated. He gets cut, he keeps going, he doesn't quit. And I do think he'll be able to get his hand raised at the end of this fight. But this is the fight that has to happen next for Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria. It is up there with your John Jones, Tom Aspinall, Alex Pereira, pretty much against anyone. But we need to see this fight happen next. Forget the meritocracy, the contenders who probably deserve it more on paper. The UFC needs a super fight. It needs one badly. And this is the fight that it should look to put on. The press conference, the build-up. If the UFC do this right, promote this right, this could be a huge fight. And it is one we need to see next. Let me know if I've convinced you guys. Let me know in the comments. I'm sure I'll get some backlash from people thinking I'm slating one of these fighters or the other. I don't care. Bring it on. Let me know what you guys think and I'll see you guys later.